Tonight we're studying Exodus chapter 6. Let's read this. It'll be important for us to get through. There's 30 verses. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For under compulsion he will let them go, and under compulsion he will drive them out of his land." God spoke further to Moses and said to him, "I am the Lord. And I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name Yahweh I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they sojourned. Furthermore, I've heard the groaning of the sons of Israel because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I've remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will deliver you from their bondage. I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgment. Then I will take you for my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord." Exodus 6, verse 9. So Moses spoke thus to the sons of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses on account of their despondency and cruel bondage. It is a formidable job to remember the world you create. There are so many distractions. A Mozart can remember his own concertos and symphonies and masses, but we are not Mozart. A Tom Roberts can recall all the Heidelberg masterpieces he painted, but we are not Roberts. We can barely remember the notes we wrote to remind us of the things we have to do tomorrow. Even when we work on a project at work, we often forget about the details just days and certainly weeks later. Imagine with me the creation of the world. Imagine making all the worlds and all the stars and the solar systems and the universes, and somebody made Mars even before the Beagle did or didn't land. Imagine making all the beagles and the terriers and the lakes and the golf courses and the planets. Imagine people. You put the people there and you know them intimately. I'm tired already, aren't you? I mean, that's a massive amount of work. God, however, is never tired. He never wearies. He that keeps Israel never slumbers nor sleeps, so says the psalmist. And God, who never tires, never forgets either. They say that of an elephant for some strange reason, but we're more sure of this characteristic being rightfully applied to the Almighty. There's a tragic story. It's told by Tennessee Williams, the American playwright. It dramatizes a true story, which amplifies it to me so much more. It's very human to begin looking for something and then forget what you're looking for. So Tennessee Williams tells the story of someone who forgot. He called him Jacob Brodsky, a shy Russian Jew whose father owned a bookstore. The older Brodsky wanted his son to go to college, but the boy, on the other hand, desired nothing but to marry Lila, his childhood sweetheart. She was a French girl, as effusive, vital, and ambitious as he was, contemplative and retiring. A couple of months after young Brodsky did go to university, his father fell ill and died. The son returned home, buried his father, and married his love, gave up uni. Then the couple moved into the apartment just above the bookshop, and Brodsky took over its management. The life of books fit him perfectly, but she didn't like it. It cramped her. She wanted more adventure, and she found it, she thought, when she met an agent who praised her beautiful singing voice and enticed her to tour Europe with a vaudeville company. Brodsky was devastated. At their parting, he reached into his pocket and he handed her the key to the front door of the bookshop. He said, "You better keep this, because you'll want it someday. Your love is not so much less than mine that you can get away from it. You will come back sometime, and I will be waiting." She kissed him, and she left. To escape the pain he felt, Brodsky withdrew deep into the bookstore and took to reading as someone else might have taken to drink. He spoke little, did little, and could most times be found at the large desk near the rear of the shop, immersed in reading the books while he waited for his love to return. Nearly 15 years later, at Christmas time, she did return. But when Brodsky rose from the reading desk that had been his place of escape for all that time, he did not take the love of his life for more than any ordinary customer. "Do you want a book?" he asked. That he didn't recognize her startled her, but she gained possession of herself and replied, "I want a book, but I've forgotten the name of it." Let me see if I can help you. So she tells a story. It's a story of childhood sweethearts, a story of a newly married couple who lived in an apartment above a bookstore, a story of a young, ambitious wife who left to seek a career, who enjoyed great success but could never relinquish the key her husband gave her when they parted. She told him the story she thought would bring him back to himself, but his face showed no recognition. Gradually, she realized that he had lost touch with his heart's desire, that he no longer knew the purpose of his waiting and his grieving, that now all he remembered was the waiting and grieving itself. You remember it. You must remember it. The story of Lila and Jacob, she says. After a long, bewildered pause, he said, there's something familiar about the story. I think I've read it somewhere. It comes to me that it's something by Tolstoy. Dropping the key, she left the shop, and Brodsky returned to his desk, to his reading, unaware that the love he waited for had come and gone. Tennessee Williams' 1931 story, Something by Tolstoy, reminds me how easy it is to miss love when it comes. Either something so distracts us, or we have so completely lost who we are and what we care about that we can't recognize our heart's desire. God, however, will not forget as Brodsky forgot. He will not be distracted by other enterprises. He will love us and long for relationship with us and will deal with things in His good time. As we look today deeper into the story of the Exodus, God will still take His time. Mind you, at the beginning of the story, in Exodus, what do we read? That God remembered and He's going to deliver the people. And He called Moses and said, go on down, get them out, 3 days, here we go. But it's longer now. It's taking much longer than anyone would have imagined. As we look, God will still take His time, leaving us in Egypt for 1 more year. It reminds me of the story of Noah and the ark. Remember, the people of the known world had gone mad and God had to bring judgment on them. He instructed Noah to build a boat, which he began to do, and according to the story, how long did it take? 120 years to finish the boat. 120 years? A lot of people would have come and gone by then. All the while, Noah, during these 120 years, was preaching. All the while, he ached for humanity to join him in the ship. Even after the fullness of time had passed, the Bible says, and there was 1 more week of patience, invitation for people to join the Noah family in the rescue ship. But alas, no one else would come, unbeknownst to the movie directors in Hollywood who make it look like hundreds and hundreds are banging on the door, let us in, let us in. The Bible indicates that no one wanted to come in. Here too we see an apparently forgetful God who's being blamed for the troubles of the Jewish people there in Egypt. Moses joined the chorus of blamers at the end of the last chapter. So now God answers and says He'll never forget. So let's look at the text. Verse 1, God says, now you will see, right now, you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. It, however, didn't happen right then. But, you know, in South African they have now and just now. Now means in due course. Just now means right now. You hear the parents in Kohl's or Woolies, you know, they've got this little extra wild child. And they say, get over here right now. I mean it, right now. And you don't know when the level is true. How many times it is before the right now becomes the right now. And that's sort of the way the Jewish people would probably have heard this, or Moses would have heard this. Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For, and our version says, under compulsion, he will let them go. But the Hebrew word has to do with chazak, strength.
Strength, yeah.
Biyad chazakah, with a strong hand, I'm going to get involved. In other words, I'm going to move the king. We read that in the Proverbs, don't we? Remember that verse in the Proverbs? Here we go. Proverbs 21:1. It says, the king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. So what a king desires to do, wants to do, plans to do is irrelevant when God says, it's in my hand. And that's one of those sovereignty questions that we always are dealing with and have to humbly submit to Tony Abbott or to the Queen or to Barack Obama if you live in the U.S. or wherever. The king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. This is the reality. And so Moses hears God saying, with a strong hand, he will let them go. Now, that's not the hand of Pharaoh. This is God's hand getting involved in the king's heart. God spoke further and said, I am Yahweh. And I appeared to the other guys as, what does it say? God Almighty. What's the Hebrew? El Shaddai. But now, by my name Yahweh, I had not made myself known to them. So I'm going to do things that are covenantal, not things that are merely supply. Shaddai, by the way, comes from either, it's a contraction of two words. Yesh, Dai. Yesh, there is. Dai, like Dayenu. There is enough. There's enough. Yesh, Dai, there's enough, meaning God will provide. He's substantial. It also could come from the word Shaddad, meaning breast. And he would be the only biblical name for God that's female. That he would be like the mother God who provides for us. That might be a little crass for some, but it makes sense to me. That he is ever all-sufficient. You see the book of Job has the word Shaddai in it. Most of the names for God in Job are that he's the providing God, even though he's just stripped him of his family and stuff and health, happiness. And this is an idea of fruit-bearing, that he's providing and causing us to grow. But that's not the name now that he's going to go by. He's going to go by Yahweh, which we looked at in chapter 3, this idea of the eternal God who was, is, will be, who ever is, the always is God, the God who ever is. And he's going to do things. And in verses 4, 5, and 6, we see a lot of activity of the Almighty, don't we? Honestly, you'll see him active throughout the whole Bible. You'll see a God who, although you might think him distant, uninterested, and busy, he's very involved. Look at verse 1, I will do. Verse 3, I appeared. Verse 4, I established my covenant. Verse 5, I heard. And finally, I remembered my covenant. There's really not a time in our relationship with the Almighty where he's uninvolved. He listens, he watches, he acts, he accomplishes. Look, the Passover verbs in chapter 6 of Exodus are all there. Verse 6 says, I'm the Lord, and verse 8 says, I'm the Lord, and they are really the brackets that frame his other active verbs. We have to trust him. We don't know God's timing. The Holocaust ended in 1945, 6 years after the war began, but 12 years after the Nuremberg laws were established. And Nazis basically began taking over lots of other things long before they took over Poland in 1939. So I'm sure people were saying, where is God? If there's a God, why doesn't he stop this madness? And at the end, did they turn around and say, hey, thanks for ending this madness? Because when they say, I want him to act now, it sounds like the mother in the supermarket. Right now. I mean right now, just now, immediately. But God does what he does. 164 times in Tanakh, we read the phrase, Ani Yahweh, I am God. There, by the way, is no verb in that sentence. Ani Yahweh, I, God. It's God who is being. It's God who is always. He was, he is, he will be. There's not a time when God wasn't, and there will never be a time when God isn't. The God who was, is. The God who is, was, and will be. Get it? No wonder some call him the eternal God. And it's because God is that we can look to him. He's always on the clock. He's ever working. But you say, I didn't find him when my dad died. My sister had cancer and I asked him to help and he didn't. He didn't fix all my situations. He didn't resolve things as I wished. This may be a tough one for you to hear, but God is not your servant. God has his own agenda, his own timing, his own will, his own purposes, and those, like you just quoted, will be fulfilled. Isaiah 14:27. The Lord of hosts has planned, and who can frustrate it or prevent it? And as for his stretched out hand, who can turn it back? There's that Exodus phrase of Yad Netuyah, the outstretched hand of God reaching to do what he wills. Nothing can stop it, not even you, not even your prayers or your plans. He will do what he wills. So he's going to do this to Pharaoh. The four verbs, there they are. God will bring us out. He will deliver us. He will redeem us and bring us to the land of Israel. Bring us out, deliver us, redeem us, bring us to the land. As a result of those 4 verbs, what do we do on Passover? The 4 cups are from those 4 verbs. So that was verses 6, 7, and 8. Those are the verbs. So Moses spoke thus, but they did not, verse 9, they didn't listen to Moses because of 2 reasons. What are they? So he had problems, but the Bible tells us in verse 9, they had problems too. They didn't listen to him on account of their own despondency, kotzer, which comes from a word that means shortness, like shortness of patience. And oh, well, I'm going to give up. And because of cruel bondage at the end of verse 9. Hard. This idea of avodah kasha is hard bondage. I mean, hard work. It goes beyond a 9 to 5 without coffee breaks. This is back-breaking work we read about a couple weeks ago where we didn't even get the straw. We had to go collect the straw, bring it back. Now, it's one thing when you're 30 years old. What if you're 50 years old and you've got to go down to mill the straw and bring it back, and you've got to beat it into bricks, and somebody's got to go get the water and bring it back. I mean, it's hard work and long, tiring work, and no breaks, and they didn't give you Subway sandwiches halfway through. You know, I mean, this is tough. And they were upset and said, I'm not listening to Moses because of the hard work. You think, well, what did Moses have to do with the hard work? Yeah, so Moses was responsible for their increased hard work. So I'm not going to listen to you, buddy. And in answer to your question, how long were the plagues enacted? The rabbis say because the Hebrews were not given to listen to Moses at the beginning, it took a full year and 9 plagues to convince not only the Egyptians, but to convince the Hebrews that Moses was our guy. Verse 10, so the Lord spoke to Moses and said, go tell Pharaoh to let the people out of the land. Wait, I tried that already. Right? But Moses spoke before the Lord and said, excuse me, the sons of Israel haven't listened to me. How will Pharaoh listen to me? Wait, I can't convince the people who want to get out. And now Pharaoh, you think I'm going to be able to do that? And you quoted this just now and said he was unskilled, right? Unskilled in speech. The Hebrew word is an amazing word. It is arel, which I think 90% of the time, let's see if I can get it, is from an unused word meaning foreskin.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So sometimes forbidden, sometimes foreskin, but the word arel is used 31 out of the 35 times in the Bible, in our translation, as uncircumcised. So my mouth is uncircumcised. My lips are uncircumcised. What does that mean? What does it mean that my lips are uncircumcised?
Things.
I'm not a holy guy. Okay. What else might it mean? I'm not one of your orators.
Yes, that's right.
I'm not one of those Greek philosophers who can rock up and woo a crowd. I'm not Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or Martin Luther King Jr. I don't have smooth speech. I'm uncircumcised. I've got extra stuff on my lips. I babble a little. I'm not the best guy for you. And I can't convince my own people. How can I convince the other guys? So God spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a charge to the sons of Israel and to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the sons of Israel out. So he said, tell you what, I want you to tell them, and I want you to tell the Egyptians that everybody's leaving, Lahotzi, to go out from the land of Egypt. It's all going to happen. So here he is, moving from 80-year-old bumbler to 80-year-old declarer. This is going to happen. He's prophesying. Moses the prophet. Here he goes. And then they stick in these genealogical lines from verse 14. Well, why did they put it in at that point? Well, they could have put it in anywhere. If maybe in modern days they would have cut and pasted this paragraph and moved it to another section before they introduced things. You know, in plays, and sometimes you go to a movie, don't you, and you say, how are they going to introduce all the characters? Somebody walks in and says, hi, Sylvia, how are you? Oh, so you know that's Sylvia. How's your kid? Menachem. You know, so right away you know there's a relationship. However they do it, they introduce the cast of characters. Do you remember how Shakespeare used to do it. They'd have a published list. And you see that in playbills today if you go to the theater, that there are, playing the role of Sylvia will be, Maureen, and playing this one and that one. So you know who's in order of appearance. And that's good. This is an old tactic by Moses to introduce the characters who are going to unpack during the rest of Exodus. I mean, you recognize some of them. You heard Moses and Aaron already. But there was Korach. There was Yocheved, who's already been in the show. There's Nachshon, who bore Nadav and Avihu, who's going to rock up in the next book. Gershon, Kahat, and Merari were the three sons of Levi, and they lived a certain length of time. But mind you, Levi was 400 years ago. It's always interesting to read the liberal theologians in their academic pursuits of what this all means. And they talk about the four different writers of Torah, not Moses. Moses merely redacted. Actually, somebody long after Moses combined all these, what are called J, E, P, and D, the Yahwist, the Elohist, the priest, and the Deuteronomist, who wrote certain parts and someone redacted, that is, edited and pulled in the pieces. And I can understand why they'd say that. The tradition is that Moses himself wrote it. I'm okay with that. I think J, E, P, and D are interesting, but really forced in many places, and I don't find it necessary. But to put Moses in his Levitical line is significant, because who else is there? Aaron. So then we get introduced to Phinehas. We'll see him later. So the introductions happen. All right. Then we skip down to verse 26. It's the same Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, bring out the sons of Israel. And that's why some say, see, it's a different author. I mean, why would you reintroduce yourself? For 6 chapters we've been talking. We know who you are. Why? Just to bring it back home to, as you say, reintroduce him. Now, it came about, verse 28, in that day when the Lord spoke to Moses, that the Lord spoke to Moses saying, I'm the Lord, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I speak to you. But Moses said, but I am Arel, I am uncircumcised in lips. How then will Pharaoh listen to me? So this is Moses' regular conversation. You got the wrong guy. And God will not forget what he's chosen. Here's some more thoughts on forgetting. Blessed are those who give without remembering, and blessed are those who take without forgetting. Physician to patient. If I've told you once, I've told you 100 times, I do not treat amnesia cases. Never mind. So we get introduced to some heroes through the book. There's a story about a city dweller who was visiting his relatives on a farm. And the farmer gave a whistle, and his dog herded all the cattle into the corral and then latched the gate with her paw. Wow, that's some dog, said the city dweller. What's her name? The forgetful farmer thought for a minute. He said, what do you call that red flower that smells good and has thorns on the stem? A rose? That's it. The farmer turned to his wife. Hey, Rose, what do we call this dog? All right. Let's get back to some more sentimental thoughts on forgetting. Forget each kindness that you do as soon as you've done it. Forget the praise that falls to you the moment you've won it. Forget the slander that you hear before you can repeat it. Forget each slight, each spite, each sneer whenever you may meet it. Remember every promise made and keep it to the letter. Remember those who lend you aid and be a grateful debtor. Remember all the happiness that comes your way in living. Forget each worry and distress. Be hopeful and forgiving. Remember good. Remember truth. Remember heaven is above you. And you'll find through age and youth that many will love you. So what did God say? Listen, he affirms his own nature and his own promises. He says, I have remembered my covenant. I am the Lord, and I will bring you out. You have his assurance that what he has said he will do. And all the I will of God carries his stamp, his guarantee. Yeah. They're not constrained in our time periods. They're not ours to fulfill. They're up to God. And God will perform his promises. Do you believe this?
Yes.
Yeah. He reminds us again and again in the Exodus story of his being the God who's larger than an elephant, but who will never forget. He remembers his covenant love to our ancestors. That's what we say in the Amidah. And we name them. He remembered his covenant love to our ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Don't we say that? Mm-hmm. So it is here in the text that the genealogy of Moses and Aaron are listed as God's reminder that he did not forget his promises. He will use the Levites. He'll use whoever he wants to use. There's a story told of Eddie Rickenbacker, one of the most famous Air Force captains of World War II, and his adventures off the coast of Papua New Guinea. It is gratitude that prompted an old man to visit an old broken pier on the eastern coast of Florida. Every Friday night until his death, it was 1973, he would return walking slowly and slightly stooped with a large bucket of shrimp. So you know it's not a Jewish story. The seagulls would flock to this old man, and he would feed them from his bucket, like we see in the park with people with bread feeding the pigeons, right? Or the sacred ibis. Many years before, in October 1942, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker was on a mission in a B-17 to deliver an important message to General Douglas MacArthur in New Guinea. But there was an unexpected detour which would hurl Captain Eddie into the most harrowing adventure of his life. Somewhere over the South Pacific, the flying fortress became lost beyond the reach of radio. Fuel ran dangerously low, so the men ditched their plane in the ocean. For nearly a month, Captain Eddie and his companions would fight the water and the weather and the scorching sun. They spent many sleepless nights recoiling as giant sharks rammed their rafts. The largest raft was 5 foot by 9 foot, the biggest shark 10 foot long. But of all their enemies at sea, one proved most formidable: starvation. 8 days out, their rations were long gone or destroyed by the salt water. It would take a miracle to sustain them, and a miracle occurred. In Captain Eddie's own words, Cherry, that was the B-17 pilot, Captain William Cherry, read the service that afternoon, and we finished with a prayer for deliverance and a hymn of praise. There was some talk, but it tapered off in the oppressive heat. With my hat pulled down over my eyes to keep out some of the glare, I dozed off. Now this is still Captain Rickenbacker talking. He said this: "Something landed on my head. I knew it was a seagull. I don't know how I knew. I just knew. Everyone else knew too. No one said a word, but peering out from under my hat brim, without moving my head, I could see the expression on their faces. They were staring at the gull, and the gull meant food. If I could catch it. And the rest, as they say, is history. Captain Eddie caught the gull. Its flesh was eaten. Its intestines were used for bait to catch fish. The survivors were sustained and their hopes renewed because a lone seagull, uncharacteristically hundreds of miles from land, offered itself as a sacrifice. You know that Captain Eddie made it. And you also know that he never forgot. Because every Friday evening about sunset, on a lonely stretch along the eastern Florida seacoast, you can see an old man walking, white-haired, bushy-eyebrowed, slightly bent, his bucket filled with shrimp to feed the gulls, to remember that one, which on a day long past gave itself without a struggle, like manna in the wilderness. So what should we learn or hear today as a result of reading our Bible, Exodus 6? What lessons do we learn? I've put down 4. Number 1, what God says he will perform, he will perform. I guess that's true anywhere in the Bible. What God promises he'll do. Secondly, complaining to God will not change anything. Well, I don't think complaining changes anything. Third, genealogies are very important in the Jewish religion, and thus a Messiah had to come from the right lineage. If someone comes as a candidate today to be Messiah, it's too late. Number 4, the integrity of the promises of God are wrapped up in the name of God, Yahweh, who was, who is, and who is eternal. So that's Exodus 6.